Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of In My Experience. And today we're going to be talking about something a little interesting. Before we get into my stories and my personal experiences of the subject, I want to put out an open air that I don't advocate the use of psychedelics. I don't want this to be a glorification, and I don't think that anyone should be doing anything that is illegal. I took the risks on my own and I did the research. And I don't want anyone to just follow in my footsteps because this sounds interesting or unique or cool. That's not what I'm trying to say. I just want to share my stories. So please be responsible and don't do anything because I did it. Learn from my mistakes. Anyways, I'm going to discuss my use of some psychedelics, specifically psilocybin, and I'm going to kind of talk through my experiences and what it did to me, how I turned out, and all that stuff, the good, the bad, and the ugly of it. So, without further ado, let's set the mood. Let's get into a cool space, and I'm going to tell my story. The first time that I had ever decided to venture down the realm of psychedelic adventures, the year was about 2016, maybe 2015, and I was in a weird headspace. I had just gotten out of a relationship and it ended kind of poorly. I was at the gym a lot. I was in a really good mindset. Aside from the failed relationship, it was still a nagging and painful thing that I was going through on the daily. For some reason, I just couldn't get over it. It was the whole first love, first person you ever been with, and you never think it's going to end until it ends. This was also near the peak of Joe Rogan discussing his experiences with psychedelics and mushrooms and all that jazz. And it was kind of a craze in a lot of different circles that I was in and a lot of different things that I was listening to. People were getting into psychedelics, specifically mushrooms. I decided that it was something that I wanted to try. I believe, I don't know, I kind of regret partly my first experience because I think a lot of it was this hype of everyone talking about it, and I was big into Joe Rogan back then. I'm not so much anymore, and it did seem really awesome. It seemed like a good experience. It seemed like something that I could learn a lot from. So, and everyone's name. I'm not going to use any names or specific places. I don't want anyone to get mad that I told any stories. So I'm just going to tell my personal point of view and leave people's names out. So the first time that I ever did anything, I took about an eighth of mushrooms, give or take a little bit because it wasn't specifically measured. And I went with a couple friends and we went on this hike up a mountainside. It was quite interesting. The mushrooms themselves kind of tasted like, I don't know, the best way I could describe it is like dirt, dirt with some fungus taste. They aren't great. They don't taste wonderful, but that's not really the point. We mashed them up. I personally mashed them up into some of those oatmeal cream pies and ate them like that, just to make the taste a little bit better. I didn't need to. They aren't that awful, but it was definitely a little bit easier to get down. The problem and the reason why I don't advocate the usage is you really don't know what it's going to be like until you take them, and you really need to do a lot of research. And I feel like I didn't do myself a full service by diving deep into the research. I researched a little bit and it seemed like something that I want to do, but you really aren't fully prepared until you're there. About 20 minutes on our hike, I could kind of feel a little bit different. I kind of felt like something was shifting, and I decided that I wanted to sit down on this trail and just kind of like watch the sky. It wasn't that I was necessarily tired. I didn't want to keep walking. It seemed like I was ready to my body wanted me to sit down and just kind of relax. And I remember as I was starting to sit down, you kind of get this weird like euphoria feeling, and your body feels kind of light. I didn't get nauseous the first time around, but I can definitely feel my stomach kind of churning a little bit. And for those of you who don't know, like typically when you eat psilocybin, your body wants to purge it. So a lot of people will vomit, and it actually will, spread the mushroom around in your stomach even more and make it even more potent. But that didn't happen to me. My two friends that I was with decided to continue on this trail, and I sat there. And this is when I first realized that they were starting to kick in, because I was looking up at the sky and I could see the moon, but it kind of looked like, the best way I can describe it is almost looked like the moon was projecting colors off the side of it, kind of like just like a rainbow color. Not like crazy, but like if you were to look at a light really close for a long time and you can kind of start seeing it like, I don't know, like almost project like weird colors. It's kind of what it was doing. And then the sky itself almost looked somewhat of like a kaleidoscope. Not like an intense one, but I could see it almost looked like everything was connected with like cobwebs. And it sounds really strange to talk about, and rethinking it in my mind, it's really difficult to not sound silly when explaining these things, but that's what I saw. And this was when my mind decided to go down like, it almost like seemed like I was traveling in my mind, and I started working out all these problems that I've had in my life, like trying to figure them out. It was almost like this weird intensive thinking. And I was still conscious. I didn't pass out, nothing like that. I was still looking at the moon, but I was so deep into my own head and my own thoughts. And it was like I was digging through all of these things that were bothering me or hurting me or, frustrated me or anything. And I worked through them. It was almost like on your day to day life, you kind of put these things aside and you don't want to think about it because it takes a lot to deal with. But in that moment, I just dealt with all of it. I I came to terms with the bad breakup. Um, it made sense. I understood why everything happened the way it did. I came to terms with some frustrations going on with my friend group. I came to terms with relationships with family and friends and a whole bunch of stuff. I was unhappy with my work. I was unhappy with my body. I was unhappy with a lot of things. And instead of just ignoring it, I dealt with it in that moment. The biggest thing that you don't quite understand until you do one of these substances, one of these mushrooms, psilocybin, or is the perception of time is very different. Because I thought that I had sat there for hours and worked through all this stuff in my head. And at some point, I kind of almost like a flick, like maybe like a like the flick of your finger. I was back in like reality, like I was out of my head, and I was back like sitting there looking at the sky. And then I realized, oh yeah, I was with people. But I felt really good. Like I felt very euphoric. I felt very up. I felt very positive. I felt very happy. And I went and started up the trail. And still at this point, I thought it had been hours. So I figured that either they were super far up this trail or that we're going to meet them coming back down or they're looking for me. And that wasn't necessarily the case. I had walked for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and I found my first friend. And sadly, he was not having a great time. At least from what I remember, I don't think he was having a good time because he thought that he had lost our other friend. And I'll leave a lot of those details out just because, like, it was involving other people. But we ended up walking a little bit more and we found him. We found another friend who was on top of the trail. So the trail led all the way up to a mountain, like at the top of a mountain, and we heard him howling at the moon at the top of the mountain. And he was as happy as could be. And yeah, we sat up there for a couple minutes, enjoyed the view, and started walking back down. I did have an almost near death experience coming down that mountain because, like, I had taken a step and I guess I just wasn't paying attention, but there was no trail and I fell. And if I would have fallen to the right, I would have fallen pretty much off the mountainside. Thankfully, I just kind of fell on my butt, and then I like looked. And I'm like, oh shit, that was that was more scary than it needed to be. But I didn't think anything of it. When we got back to transportation, back to reality, we had realized that we had only been on this trail for maybe a total of an hour and a half, and that really messed with me. Because like I thought that I was in my head for multiple hours, and I thought we had been on this trail for a very long time, but really we were only up and down in maybe an hour and a half. And we kind of joked about how we were the greatest hikers ever because we traveled that whole entire mountain so quickly. We ended up getting a ride home and returned safely. And I remember that night, like, because like psilocybin can last for various amounts of times according to people on the internet. Some people can have experiences last for 6 to 8 hours. Some people have it last for a shorter amount of time. It seems like I peaked, a word that is used often, pretty early on, and I was coming down for most of the rest of the evening. And by the time I made it back to where we were going, I didn't have any visual anything. The only visual stuff I really saw was the moon looked kind of cool and the sky looked interesting. I do think that a lot of, maybe this is just my personal experience, but I do think the whole, maybe it's acid that does it, but psilocybin, I don't think you really get like dragons flying around like people say. I feel like that's kind of like a negative fake stigma on this type of stuff. Maybe it does happen to some people, but I've never had that. Anyways, I remember when we got back to where we were staying for the night, I had like a lot of happiness, and I remember it was such a overbearing amount of happiness that I was like messaging friends and people in my life and saying like how thankful I was for them, and it's like like 11 o'clock at night, and you know hopefully they appreciate it and didn't think I was some fucking lunatic texting him at midnight. Anyways, that was the first experience, and it was really, I came away with like a lot of positives. It wasn't bad or anything like that. The second one was vastly more intense, and yeah, I still think about it on the regular. I do think it was one of those moments in life where you say you have a before and after this event, and for a long time this was my before and after. It was a lot. It was a lot going on. So I had a bigger group of friends and I found a place that we could go camping, and it had sort of like trailer cabins esque, but it was super cold, and that comes into play later. But it was out in the middle of nowhere. Like there's not really people, there's no big cities, like you're pretty far out from civilization, which is personally what I wanted. I wanted to be out in nature to experience that. And that's one thing I didn't mention. The first story is that walking on the trail and being around trees and just nature, it is way interesting. It's a feeling that you don't get, because it's almost like you're more aware that those trees are breathing and alive. I remember stopping for a second, just kind of like observing these trees like move in the wind, and I'm like, it just makes you realize how much smaller we really are. Anyways, so for the next amount, I did something that was really not smart. And that was, I doubled my dosage from the first one. So now I'm doing a 1/4 ounce of psilocybin. And I probably shouldn't have. Now, from my understanding, like, you can't overdose or die from psilocybin or anything like that. And I know you can have psychosis, and some people have had psychological breaks from doing too much of it, but there's no lethality from my understanding. But I don't think that I respected them enough to do that much, because I was not prepared for what was to come. So after ingesting them, and a bunch of people, we were standing around a campfire trying to stay warm, and I ate them just plain, and there was a lot of them to get through, but I pretty much just put the whole entire 2 handfuls in my mouth and started chewing, and after a while they were down. I remember one of my friends first said, he pretty much was like, oh, I got to go throw up, and then another friend followed him, and I started getting really nauseous, and I'm like, oh man, this is going to be rough. And everyone went in the back of this trailer, and they started throwing up, and I felt like myself about ready to throw up, and then I kind of held it down, because I really don't like throwing up. Don't know if that was good or bad, but regardless, I didn't. And but I still had, it still came up, and then I just kind of forced it back down. And after that moment, I was kind of coughing, and then I closed my eyes for a second, opened them, and it was a whole other experience. It was brighter. The moon was putting off way more light now. The ground kind of was moving, almost like the ground was breathing. Everything all the lights that were turned on, it almost looked like they were kind of dancing and moving around and projecting more colors off of them than normal. It's the best way to explain it is if you guys have ever wore those glasses for a science class that will stretch the light particles, and you can see that the color particles and light particles, and they almost kind of stretch out. That's exactly what it looks like with no glasses on. And it is kind of wild the first time you see it. I had an encounter with one of my good friends, and he kind of put the fear of he put fear in my head a little bit, because at the time he was kind of the rock that I was looking for, because I was starting to panic a little bit, and I was hoping that he was going to be don't worry, we got this. And the first thing he says to me is I think we took too much. And that was not a great way to start this adventure into whatever was about to come. So we were kind of sitting around the fire, but a lot of us, including me, really bad, I was starting to get really, really cold. And I don't know if it was just extra enhanced because of what I was on, or if it was something else. I don't know, but it just felt like I was starting to freeze. And I wasn't. It's not that cold out there. It was cold enough, and there was snow on the ground, but it wasn't if we don't get inside, we're gonna die. So we ended up making our way inside, but there's still not a lot of heat. We had some portable heaters, and then everyone kind of had, the room was getting warmer because a bunch of people were in there. But by this time, everything is starting to kick in really hard for me. And a lot of it I don't necessarily remember, the build up to like the crazy part. Like I remember sitting in this chair and just kind of like starting to have like panic. I don't know if it was a panic attack or not, but I would like close my eyes and I would just have like weird visuals, not of like things or creatures, but like just colors and like weird shapes and weird objects. And then like I would like, it's so hard to explain, but like I would start thinking about something and then I would have to keep thinking about that until I got to a solution. But sorry, I had to take a small pause and get some water. Hard cut. To stop where I was at, as I would have to think about something and then come to be able to stop thinking about that thing, I would have to go back through it in my mind. Like how I got to that point. Like let's say I was thinking about like a movie and how it ended. I would have to think about that movie and how it ended, and then I would have to retrace my steps to be able to stop thinking about that and think about something else. Sounds crazy, I know, because it was. And this went on for, like I said, time's really weird. I don't know how long I was stuck in this. And then I remember like opening my eyes again and like perceiving everyone in the room and kind of seeing what's going on. And I see my one really good buddy, and he looks like he's not having a good time. He's on like this bed holding a pillow and just kind of not looking like things are okay. And then a bunch of people came into the room, and I remember my buddy saying like, hey, there can't be this many people in the room. People need to get out of here. And then like it turned into like this weird moment in time, because like I don't know what's going, like I'm so out of it at this point. But like I was panicking even more now because it seemed like there was a confrontation, but I don't know if there really was or not. And then people ended up leaving, and I think some people even like left the campground area. And this is when I kind of got up and I started moving around a little bit and like pacing, and like like I was verbally saying like, hey, I'm not doing okay. Like because I didn't know what to do with myself. And I remember sitting back down and then closing my eyes and then going through that same weird loop again, and then getting snapped out of it by another friend coming in and like touching my leg and saying like, hey, are you okay? And I told him no, I wasn't, and he was kind of like, don't worry, you'll be okay. And that kind of gave me like some reassurance. And I got back up, and then I looked in the mirror, which is a big no-no, because I saw myself, but it was all distorted. Like I looked really weird and messed up, and like my skin was moving. Like the best way I could do it is like, the best way that I could explain it is like it looked like all my pores were a lot bigger and they were breathing. So that made my skin look like it was moving. It was really not cool to see. And I can still personally vision it in my head perfectly. It's like if you guys see those pictures that people make of like tryptophobia or whatever it is, like the fear of small holes or whatever, it looked like one of those pictures, but like on my face. So that wasn't cool. And then this was the part that like really kind of fucked me up, is I remember sitting back down, and then some allotted time had passed of me trying to like take deep breaths and trying to relax. And then I this is where I kind of like stopped forgetting what happened. I don't really remember what led me to the next point, but when I came back into like normal reality, I had forgotten everything. Like, and according to stuff on the internet, is I experienced ego death. I didn't remember like where I came from or who I was really. I I recognized people around me, and I was comfortable with the people around me. But it pretty much, the way that I can explain it the best is it felt like I was born in that cabin and nothing else has ever happened to me besides the point of when this started. I couldn't remember my family. I couldn't remember like friends that weren't in the room. I couldn't remember anything. I didn't remember my name really. Like I knew like my character. Like I knew like what I thought in the moment. And I didn't feel dumb or like unintelligent. I just couldn't remember anything. And it was strangely peaceful in that moment. And I think that that moment specifically is the point of like an event that happened like before and after an event in your life. It made me think a lot after I had came back to who I was. There was just something, and I can't really explain it, but like something happened in that moment that made me change a lot of me, a lot of what I thought about, a lot of what was important to me, and I really came out in a positive light, even though I had a quote unquote bad trip because it was panic induced and I could never relax. But it was like, I don't know, it was amazing for that moment of trying to understand like what is everything. And I took that time of like not remembering who I was to try and figure it out. I didn't have an answer, as no one really does. But after sitting there for I don't know how long, not knowing who I was, things slowly started flooding back in, and I started coming back all the way from having a bad time to a really good time. And one thing that I have kind of kept out of the story because it's super negative and I don't want to like hit too much on it, but for a lot of this time, I thought I was dying. I thought that I was going to die. And I think that when I experienced the ego death, that was like, maybe that was my mind saying, like, no, this is what it would be like if you did. But you haven't. So calm down. I don't know. I've tried to come up with reasons why or who, and you really can't. You just have to go with the experience. Anyways, everything kind of started flooding back. I started having my memories again. I started having all the things come back. I realized where I was at. And there was a person there specifically that helped me like get out of the panic. And that was really cool of them. They just kind of were like, hey, like, do you need a hug? And that hug kind of like brought me back into reality because I was like, oh, okay, this is like, this person kind of knows me. Like, this is cool, this is fine. And then I remember getting into like a bed and like relaxing and like getting warm, and it got a lot better from there. And then I think I fell asleep for a little bit, but I can't remember. Like, that's the one thing is like, this was a while ago, right? Like, I might have my timelines mixed up. I think maybe the first time I ever did it, the first story I told was maybe in like 2013 or 14, and this one was in 2016. And I don't know. So yeah, there was like there was like a bed and there was people in the bed. Everyone was kind of like talking and, you know, getting warm and all that type of stuff. And then I remember maybe falling asleep or maybe kind of just like sitting there thinking about stuff. And then I got a burst of energy, and I remember like telling the people, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna go outside. Because like it triggered in my head that like a lot of my like my close friends who I was with weren't in there. And like I kinda, it wasn't like a panic, but I was like, oh, what are they doing? And then I also needed to use the restroom really bad. So when I opened the door out of this cabin, it was such a weird experience. Cause like everything has been like I thought I almost like spent a lifetime in that cabin. Like it like in my head that's what it felt like. And then when opening that door and seeing all these familiar things again and then having that rush back in was like such a big like endorphin rush, and my brain was just pumped full of all the good chemicals, and I can't think of what it was, serotonin, just like, and dopamine. I was just feeling on top of the world. And my friends tell me, and I kind of remember doing this, they say that I did like one of the funniest things. Like I said like hi, because like a couple of them were standing by the fire, and then I had like walked over to like the other cabin and like did this weird like spin and like was like super happy, and I was like laughing, and then I went to the bathroom and came back, and at this point I was pretty much fully back and just having mild like visuals, right? So I was back to being Wes. I was back to being, you know, I was back to just reality. And it was really fun. I mean, it was a lot. My head was pounding. Like I was still thinking about everything, and there was still a lot to take away. And time was still a little messed up. Cuz like this honestly felt like such a long time. Like I felt like I was in that first cabin for years. And then when I was told it was only like 5 or 6 hours at most, I was like, holy shit. But we kind of came back. I kind of came back to reality. And there was only two of us who took that really high dosage. Everyone else took a lot smaller. So most people didn't have that crazy of a reaction. So they were more like just hanging out. And a bunch of us ended up going to one of the cabins, and there was like a hot stove or something like that, and we started that up with some fire, and it made the room like super hot. And we ended up watching Ice Age 2 The Meltdown, which is just a funny part of the story, because it was just so like I just went through this whole entire crazy event, and now I'm watching Ice Age. But I ended up falling asleep in there maybe after like half the movie. My brain was pounding. And I remember waking up the next morning, and it was just so weird. Like everything felt weird. Everything felt off. Not like in a negative way, but it just was like I think I'd put so many emotions and so much weird energy, I guess, into that moment that I just felt off a little bit, like being around a couple people. And it was almost awkward, I guess, because I felt kind of ashamed, even though I guess I really didn't have anything to be ashamed of. I think that I was just ashamed because I was embarrassed of how I acted, but I was reassured that that I didn't really do anything embarrassing. Like I just had a crazy experience. It just still felt weird, but it was fine. Like it was still a positive. It did take when I started like completely having nothing in my system and thinking about the experience, that's when I grew a lot from it, because I could look back and like think subjectively of like, if I really did have a moment where like I forgot everything, how would I want to live going forward? And it made me really change a lot of stuff, that like how I, like, even until this day, like it changed how I interact with people. Because I used to be like, I feel like I was like pretty opinionated and would like to not, I mean, I would never argue with like friends and stuff or family really, but like there was a lot of stuff that would bother me in life. I guess one of the big ones is religion. I used to be a lot more openly willing to argue about religion and why I think the way that I think, and why I think it's whatever. Like I used to be a little bit more open about, you know, my frustrations and whatnot, and I stopped. It made me think like, well, you know, they're just living their life, so why should I take time out of my day to try and be a dickhead to them, you know? And even though there's people who've been dickheads to me, you know, they're in the same shoes that I was in. You know, they're frustrated at me or frustrated at other people for certain things, and pretty much I just became a lot more. What's a good way to put it? I don't even know how to explain it. Less argumentative and less worried about what other people are doing in their lives. You know, I was never like actively going after people or anything like that, but I wouldn't shy away from those type of confrontations. And now I don't even give it the time of day. And this goes for everything, not just like religious things, but like everything in my day-to-day life. There's no longer a need for arguments. There's no longer a need for being frustrated about what other people are doing in this world, because at the end of the day, like, if they're living, they're having a human experience. And whether or not those human experiences line up with what I think is right or wrong doesn't mean anything. Because what's right or wrong to them is still correct. You know, they've lived their life up to a point to have that be their reality. So me being rude or disrespectful or argumentative towards what their reality is kind of fucked up. And you know, they're having their human experiences, I'm having mine. So what makes me, you know, what makes me any better, what makes my opinions any more important? You know, it's pointless. There's, you know, it sounds corny and it sounds hippie, but it made me realize like, if I could just be happy with everybody, and if everyone was just happier with everybody regardless of what they're doing, we would have a lot better reality. You know, we really would. It sounds like some hippie bullshit, but it is. You know, you have an experience like that and you realize like all that shit doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that we're here for a limited amount of time with a possibility of other things existing, but we can't prove or disprove anything we can't see. So we don't know if there is or if there isn't. But the one thing we know for a fact is there's a limited amount of time that we have a breathing and heart beating body. And why spend it being hateful? That's really what I came away with. And it was a wild experience and nothing like anything else that has ever happened in my life. I still don't condone anyone using it. I think that, you know, maybe years down the road when more studies come out, because there are plenty of studies showing that it can cure, excuse me, I don't want to use the word cure, that it can help with depression and anxiety and different things like that. And from my experiences, yes, absolutely. But until it's legal, don't get into any trouble trying to do things. If you are going to do things, please be safe. Make sure that you're getting stuff from very safe and trusted sources. If you're using other type of substances, please, by God, I don't care if you think it's lame. I don't care if you're worried people will judge you. Test your stuff. Be an adult. Like, we don't have to be kids anymore and try and act cool. If you want to use stuff, you're going to use stuff, but please just get test kits. Make sure it's safe. You know, I know too many people who have lost their lives from not taking 2 minutes out of their day to test the substances that they're going to use. Like, it's not worth it's not worth being embarrassed for 10 seconds and no one's ever going to remember it. Like, test your things. If you're going to use them, I highly suggest don't, but I'm not going to tell anyone what to do. Anyways, guys, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to bring my face back as I conclude the stories. I would love to hear anyone else's if you have had experiences. Something that I enjoy talking about. I haven't touched anything since 2016 because it was such a monumental experience. I go back and forth in my mind if I ever will again or not. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I definitely want to try them again and see what it's like, knowing now that after that experience and knowing that I'll make it through it, how they would be now. And then some days I'm like, I don't want to. I feel like I took away what I wanted to from that part of my life and I'm on to a different part. But I'm always evolving, as I hope everyone else is, and my thoughts change from month to month and year to year, and maybe I'll get to a point again where I'm like, yeah, I definitely want to try them again. Yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to catch you on the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Peace.